Okay, so the diagrams and the questions and pictures should all correspond from this lesson with part 6 of your ecology booklet. Okay.
Hello again. Well, now on to the carbon cycle. But before we start, there's some bits from Biology 1, from bits you've learnt in the past, that you need to recap. So I'm going to hand over to that man again, just to run through some of the recap questions for you to think about and make sure everybody's at the same stage before we move on to actually the carbon cycle itself. And then I'll show you something I made earlier.
Now, in terms of recap, if you look at these questions, so first one, what's the process that all living things, animals, plants, bacteria, what do they do to get energy in their cells? So there's one term, begins with the letter R. You should know that from before. So see if you can remember it, and we'll go on to the answers in a minute. And then for that process, beginning with R, what do you need for it? What are the reactants? Question 2. Question 3, what do you make? So from that process, what are the products made from this process? And then question 4, plants cannot take in food from their environment, they must make their own. What's that process called where plants make their own food? Begins with the letter P. And these two processes are really clearly linked together. And what do plants need to take in? So you might remember one of them, you might remember two. So if you need to pause it for a second, I would suggest you pause it, maybe write the question and the answer, so you've got your recap, or if it's really straightforward to you, just move on. And obviously the answers are, the process that all living things do is respiration. That's how we get the energy. What do we need for that? We need glucose and oxygen. What do we make? We make carbon dioxide and water. Plants do photosynthesis, and for that they need carbon dioxide and water. So, real clear link. Respiration makes carbon dioxide and water, and that carbon dioxide is released into the air, and photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide is removed from the air, and this is really important how it links with Biology 1. This is the fundamentals of the carbon cycle, how it goes round and round. So what I am breathing out now while I'm talking to you may later today be taken in by a plant. That plant may be eaten later by a slug. That slug, when it does respiration, might release that carbon dioxide again, and round it goes. Now, in terms of keywords, when we talk about things being broken down or decomposed, so when a creature dies, or when a creature goes to the toilet, an organism, when a dog poo, for example, is decomposed, when a dead body is decomposed, it means it's broken down. Now, that doesn't just happen. That is done by a group of organisms called decomposers. And without decomposers, there'd be loads and loads of waste everywhere. So they're an absolutely essential part of that carbon cycle. These are microorganisms, the decomposers. So bacteria, fungi, and they break down, so they're microscopic, obviously the micro bit. The other term here, detrivore, you would know, hopefully, that a carnivore eats meat, and a herbivore, like a sheep or a rabbit, eats plants, and a detrivore will feed off dead bodies. So, in a way, if you see a fungus growing on a dead bit of branch on the forest floor, the fungus, the mushroom, is a detrivore feeding off the dead bit of wood. A maggot feeding off the dead body of an animal in the woodland. The maggot is a detrivore. They're feeding off dead bodies. So they are in a way decomposers, but they're detrivores because their food source comes from the dead creatures. Now, Earth is a closed system. All that means is, on Earth, there's a certain amount of carbon. And that carbon can't be made, it can't be lost. It's just in different forms. So there's some carbon in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there's some carbon in fossil fuels underground. And most living things, in fact, all living things, not most, are carbon based. So me, you, everything that's living on this planet is made of proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and these blocks, all of those food groups, are actually based around carbon, and they all contain carbon. So this diagram is in your workbooks. It's in the attachment with this. So just have a look at it. So when we go from here, and we've got the plants, they're taking... Right, well, let's think about the rainforest as an example. Obviously, with the massive amount of plants, etc., it takes in loads of carbon dioxide every day. And then you've got loads and loads of different living organisms here, loads of consumers taking that carbon from the plants into their bodies. And then you've got both the plants and the animals doing loads of respiration and releasing the carbon dioxide again. Both the plants and animals, if they don't use the energy for respiration, eventually when they die, they end up decomposing on the forest floor. But anyway, let's see if we can find some of the local inhabitants to try and explain it even more. Oh wow, a sloth. Hello, Simon. Let's see if he'll talk to us.
Well, as that man just said, I'm a sloth, and I live here in the rainforest. So, carbon cycle. Well, these plants here around me take in carbon dioxide from the air in a process called photosynthesis. Then I eat the plants, and I take that carbon into my body in the foods like sugars and proteins. Sugar's a carbohydrate, and then they can become part of my body. If I breathe out, then that carbon goes back into the environment around me, where it started. That's because when I breathe out, I release carbon dioxide, and that's made by respiration in my cells when I use the carbohydrates and the sugars for energy. But some of that carbon that came from the plants, in the proteins and fats and carbohydrates, it becomes part of this beautiful body that you can see in front of you. Now, when I go toilet, maybe some of that carbon's released out that way, and it ends up on the forest floor to be rotted away by other creatures. Or, eventually, I'll probably die. And then, the little creatures that decompose me will release that carbon dioxide by respiration. So you see, all the carbon dioxide that came into the plants for photosynthesis and then ended up in me when I ate them, it all ends up back in the atmosphere anyway. And that's why it's a cycle. the carbon goes round and round, like the wheels on a bus.
Well, thank you, Simon the Sloth. So we have this carbon cycle, and hopefully what you'll be able to do now is not just look at the diagram in the booklet, but I would suggest if you're working in your own books that you actually draw it out for yourself. It's going to be a lot more memorable if you use your own animals, if you use Simon the Sloth, for example. So we've got this carbon dioxide in the air up here, and that is taken in by plants. The plants use it in photosynthesis. Then the plants can release it straight back into the air when they do their respiration, or it could be taken in from the plant to the animal. Then the animal can release it by respiration, or it might end up, change the colour of the pen there, it might end up, change the colour of the pen there, it might end up down here in the dead organisms and their waste products, and it might be ate by the detrivores and these decay organisms, and therefore the respiration back to the air, and the carbon goes round and round in a cycle. So, questions in the booklet: what is meant by a closed system, and what do the arrows in the carbon cycle represent? Please pause and do your answers for those. And here we have a closed system is where nothing can be lost or gained to a system, and the arrows are showing where the carbon is going. Two most important processes: photosynthesis and where that happens in the carbon cycle, and then respiration by the animals feeding upon those carbon compounds, and the respiration here by the animals, the decay organisms, the detrivores and decomposers doing respiration. And so there's some other questions in your booklet for you to have an attempt at, but I think what's probably most important in your own books is to start off with a plant. There we go. And then explain. So you can explain here that plants use photosynthesis and take the carbon in. Then you can have your picture of your sloth. Mine's quite simple. And how that carbon becomes part of the sloth's body, and how the sloth might breathe the carbon dioxide back out, or the sloth might go to the toilet and produce waste products that then go back into it. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave it here for now, but in the next lesson we'll look at how we interfere with the carbon cycle, and why the carbon cycle and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is quite topical news at the moment, and why it's changing. Okay, so once you've done your work, whether it's be in the booklet, some of it, or whether it be in your own books with your own drawings and explanations, please just send that in to your teacher. Thank you very much.